This is the Psychedelic Spotlight Podcast. I'm David Flores, your host, CEO of Global Track Solutions, and I'm very excited because we get to debut a brand new segment here to the Psychedelic Spotlight Podcast. The segment is titled Ask a Psychotherapist, and we've given you the opportunity to submit your questions through our various social media platforms that you would like to ask an experienced psychotherapist. And we are so excited and so privileged to have Kelli Foulkrod joining us here today. She is the operator of the Organic Mental Health Center in Austin, Texas. She's also a distinguished member of the advisory board here at Global Track Solutions. We've had an opportunity to have Kelli on the podcast, I believe back in November. So for anyone out there that has not had an opportunity yet to listen to that podcast, I highly recommend it in order to get a more thorough and detailed understanding of the phenomenal work Kelli is doing there with the Organic Mental Health Center. But with all of that, Kelli, thank you so much for joining us and for participating in this. This is very, very exciting. We're glad to have you. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me again. I'm really excited to dive into the questions.
Yeah, I am too. We've got a lot of really good questions here. So before we dive into the questions, though, just want to get a disclaimer out there, very important disclaimer for our viewers and our listeners. And disclaimers, the views and opinions shared by Kelli and myself during the podcast are meant solely and exclusively for informational and educational purposes only, and is not in any manner meant to be relied upon as a recommendation for treatment or medical advice. Both Kelli Foulkrod and Psychedelic Spotlight strongly recommend that anyone considering psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy or any treatment for a mental health or medical condition consult with their physician or doctor beforehand. So now that we've appeased our legal team and everything, we can dive right into this. And I want to first also thank everyone out there that submitted questions. We received a lot through our different social media platforms. Got some really good questions coming in. And for time constraint purposes, we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. And we've also decided to omit the usernames of any questions that came in just for privacy purposes, but we'll use the first names here. So I guess the first one, which comes from Samantha, a really good question, I think, to kick this off here is, what exactly is psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, and how are you integrating it carefully into your practice's offerings?
Okay, so legally, what a licensed mental health professional can do currently in the United States is different than what you might hear in terms of what is happening in the clinical trials. So there are psychedelic-assisted psychotherapists who are sitting with people with MDMA and psilocybin within clinical trials. However, the state that I'm in currently, those medicines are not available. So as of today, what the most common form of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is in America is going to be ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. I believe that proper training is key to facilitating psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. So this is training beyond just getting, a master's degree and the requisite licensure. The training program should, in my opinion, involve the therapist using the substance to have experiences themselves so that they can know the terrain that they're holding space for. I think that's really paramount. And surprisingly, there are training programs that don't involve that. And so I think if we're going to be assisting people and facilitating their healing process, then we need to understand experientially what that is like. So the training is important. And then to me, ongoing mentorship, having colleagues, supervisors, professionals to be able to consult with ongoing throughout the work of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, because it's a different ballgame than regular therapy. There is a lot of transference and countertransference that happens when somebody is dissolving their ego and they're in an unconscious realm. In a lot of the clinical trials, it's just a very interesting side note, they will have both genders of therapists in the room. They'll have both a male and a female, not only for impeccable boundaries, purposes, but also, again, to kind of mirror and mimic this divine masculine, divine feminine, mom, dad archetypes within the unconscious. And so as we talk about, just moving more into a clinic setting, working with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, that's not always the case. Sometimes there are co-therapists, sometimes there's just one. And the way I would say that is really important to do this carefully, or how I've integrated this into my practice, and you'll hear me say this over and over and over again, but it is worth repeating, is that proper preparation and proper integration are the way, and proper assessment, proper intake, making sure that the individual that is going to be working with the ketamine or any psychedelic substance, that it's a good fit, that we've properly weighed the risk and benefits, that there are no mitigating risk factors, right? So the intake is first, but then really preparing somebody's psyche for the experience. And then after the expanded state of consciousness, really focusing on the integration, picking up the pieces of the psyche and putting them back together to create a sense of wholeness. And so that is something that I see in this movement, that we need more education on, as therapists, as clinicians, as guides, as facilitators. I think that there's not enough emphasis on the preparation and the integration, because in my opinion, that's how long-lasting transformation happens, and not just brief symptom management.
Right, most definitely. And I think we can agree that interest as a whole, really is continuing to increase as far as, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy and just psychedelics in general. And with that, you have a lot of clinicians and practitioners now starting to incorporate psychedelics into their practice and into their offerings, which on one hand is great. And on the other hand, there should be a cause for just pause and concern, making sure that people are following the right steps and going through the right training courses and, a lot of stuff that you touched on there. So that brings me to the next question here, submitted by Kennedy, who's asking, what should someone look for when researching therapists who have incorporated integration into their offerings?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I highly recommend that you interview anybody you're considering working with when we're talking about your unconscious mind. Even if it's a licensed mental health professional. The conversation about the underground realm and working with people who are holding ceremonies, that's a different conversation, but this kind of all ties together. Because I get asked this question a lot, and I'm like, getting a feel for that person's energy, their personality style. Do you even resonate? Do you click with them? That's really important. That's the first step. And then doing your research on their training, making sure that they've done the training, making sure that they have experience. Yeah, I wouldn't trust my unconscious mind, with somebody that just finished school and hadn't ever had these experiences. It's no offense to that person, but we're in very deep psychic territory. And so you really want to make sure somebody's had really long-term experiences, and it's okay to ask those questions. How many people have you sat with? How many people have you guided? If we're talking about just integration, how many clients have you worked with? That's a valid question to ask in terms of integration. Each practitioner approaches integration differently. Everybody has a different approach of how they integrate. Some will just do traditional talking and emotional processing. Some will incorporate the body and somatics and movement. Some will have nature-based, right? Where we're going to go outside, and we let the sun help you integrate. So everybody is going to be different in terms of the modalities that they use for integration. So you could also ask questions of, what approach or philosophy do you take to integration? Because integration is a whole other, there's no gold standard either.
Right.
And there's no one way to do it. And so finding a practitioner not only that resonates with you, but also has experience.
Yeah, I would agree. And this is actually a question that for me now. But it's, I think we can all agree too that, when you're looking for a doctor or, a psychiatrist, psychologist, I mean, heck, even, a dentist, you want to feel comfortable with that individual, because things do get quite personal. Do you think that that it's even more important to ensure that the practitioner or the therapist or the clinician that you are choosing to possibly participate in with psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is absolutely someone that you are very comfortable with? Do you think there's more of an emphasis on it, given sort of that level of deep dive into someone's psyche and personality that is involved in this?
Absolutely. Because, and I've seen this, if there's some part of you that doesn't feel safe, you're not going to be able to let go.
No.
And that's the whole point.
It is.
It's surrendering the ego. And
right.
I've seen people white knuckle, right? When I have worked in ketamine clinics and there's multiple people in the room, right? Whether that's doctors or nurses, right? When there's these accessory people in the room, let's just say a woman has had a sexual trauma history and there happens to be a man in the room. That can derail the whole process.
Yeah.
It can. And I've seen it where people are like white knuckling, like maybe they're counting so that they, doing something with their ego, stay in their ego so that they don't have to let go. And so sense of safety is first and foremost. Again, this goes back to proper preparation. My job when I'm preparing somebody for psychedelic work is not only to gather history of the traumas and the landmines that we might encounter, but it's also to develop a sense of safety, to let them know who I am so they can start to trust me, to develop rapport, and to start to build the container. Because we're working with an energetic container every time somebody's ego is dissolved. And it's my job to make sure that that container is impeccable, right? It's like I'm holding down the fort so this person can let go. And I would never just start working with somebody right off the bat with ketamine, like first session. That is crazy.
Yeah.
It takes time. It's relationship development for them to learn that I'm trustworthy, and then we can go into these deeper realms.
I mean, there's so many different elements and components to it, but I mean, having someone like yourself making sure that, all of those different bases are covered and all those different points, I mean, it's so important. So that's really, really great. The next question that we have here is from Simon. And it is, what do you think is the most common misconception related to psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy?
There are so many.
I know.
If I had to narrow it down to one, I mean, I feel like we're working against a huge stigma in this work, in that people that are drawn to this work just want to get high. And I think, to me, I think that's at the top of the list, because I think that is not true.
Right.
And I think a lot of people still have etched into their mind what happened in the 60s and 70s in terms of the psychedelic movement. And this part of the movement is very different, because there was clinical research being done back then, but the research has come much farther. And we are backing this by science now in a very deeper way than we were in the 60s and 70s. And so nonetheless, I think there is this stigma that people that are drawn to this work are druggies. And that is part of the myth I'd like to dispel.
Yeah.
That it is a basic human right for a human to explore their consciousness. Humans have been exploring their consciousness since the dawn of civilization. This is part of our evolution in terms of our humanity. It's not about just getting high. And the people that are coming to this medicine, this form of healing, are usually highly traumatized, have significant trauma histories. And here we have these medicines that is what they address. So I really think it's a matter of education, of dispelling this myth that like people are just doing this to get high. And another deeper conversation, longer conversation, is that I do believe healing can happen in recreational settings. I do. The work I do is focus on therapeutic and spiritual healing.
Right.
But that's not to say that recreational has no value, because it does. But from my perspective, like the more we can educate people and the more people like me, the doctors, the lawyers, right, the professionals can come out of the psychedelic closet. I myself have had personal fears about being transparent about this work because of the judgment that comes from my colleagues. And I think that the more that we can just have courage and step up and say, no, these medicines have changed my life, they're changing my client's life. I have a job, I run a family, you know what I mean? I'm an upstanding citizen. I'm not getting high all day, right? I think the more we can come out and be honest and transparent, I think the more we can start to shift the conditioning around psychedelics that our culture has and start to see them in a new way.
Right. And I think it's happening, but I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like, at least from my perspective and my view, that there's a very well-defined line that separates psychedelic treatment and psychedelic therapy from traditional treatments and therapy that the American healthcare system has really leaned on and relied upon for so many decades, which is a great transition into this question here from Teresa, who asks, do you think there will ever come a day when the American healthcare system will be able to embrace psychedelic healing and treatment and consider it as legitimate as some of the conventional treatments that it's relied upon? Which is also a good question too, because accessibility, I mean, a lot of psychedelic assisted treatments and therapies are not covered by insurance. People have to pay out of pocket. So what's your sort of thought and viewpoint on all of that?
Yes. Great question. I mean, yes, ketamine is still not covered under insurance. I do think that that's going to change. I think that's coming. And absolutely, I think it's happening. I think it's happening as we speak. What we've seen in the decriminalized nature movements, I mean, this is how cannabis started. And so it's happening. The interesting thing that I hear in the movement, because there's two sides, there's two camps, and my hope is that these sides, just like politics, that we can come together and become unified, because we all are working towards the same goal, which is accessibility for anybody who wants to access this form of healing. So one camp says, we need to keep the plants sacred. We do not need to adulterate them. We need to just keep the 1,000-year tradition and lineage of working with plant medicines the way it is. And then there's another camp on the movement that says, in order to legitimize this movement, we must involve doctors who can write prescriptions and turn these plants into pills. And I have been at psychedelic conferences where huge arguments happen between these two sides, right? And I can hear them both, because I do understand that there are some people that if a doctor is writing a prescription for psilocybin, that they're much more likely to access that treatment than dried mushrooms on the black market. I get it, right? I get it. And can we make space for both being a possibility? Because we have so much diversity in humans. I don't know if there's just one way to access these medicines. This is why I wake up and do the work every day, is because I do see in the next 18 months, psilocybin is going to be legal for therapeutic purposes for people like me to work with, which is my ultimate goal. So I predict within the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years,
right.
will end.
Right. And we're seeing it in the state of Oregon. They've had Measure 109 passed, so they're going to be able to develop a psilocybin, state-run therapeutic program. That's obviously, very exciting. But what does that do for you? I mean, what opportunities does being able to integrate psilocybin, into your practice offerings? I mean, what doors does that start to open from a treatment perspective?
I mean, for me personally, my energy is most aligned with plants.
Yeah.
And so, for me personally, and every practitioner is different, I find that each practitioner, each clinician, each therapist finds one or two tools that they deeply resonate, and then they specialize in those. And psilocybin is one of my like absolute go-to. Have seen so much radical transformation with it. And so for me, it would mean the ability to safely and effectively help people address complex PTSD and trauma. I believe that psilocybin in particular in Mexico and in the traditions and the lineages of Mesoamerican curanderismo, they refer to the mushrooms as los niños because they help to access your inner child to these inner states of where childhood trauma got laid down. So they're the perfect remedy for what shows up in my office, which is 9 times out of 10 deep-seated childhood trauma. And so I can't tell you how excited I am to begin working with plants and to have access to being able to facilitate ceremonies. You know, I always envision continuing to work one-on-one with people because that's the model I've been doing for so long, but I'm also open to, as the paradigm is shifting, you know, working with groups or larger people, larger amounts of people. Because again, in indigenous healing cultures, they don't work one-on-one. Healing happens in community. That's how it's always happened. It's always happened in circles. And so I think it could open up this opportunity for me to be able to be in service to more people. And that's pretty exciting.
It's very exciting. Yeah, very. I mean, there's so much on the horizon here, which keeps us so motivated. So that's great. Next question here, you know, and it's a question that we got quite frequently here that was submitted to us, but I think this was the one that was probably phrased the best. And I just want to reiterate again that, you know, any information, anything that we share here is not meant to be medical advice or serve as that. But this question comes from Alejandro, and he's saying that he's heard stories of people being able to reduce their reliance on anxiety medication after a few integration sessions. Is this possible? It sounds a little too good to be true. Now, I mean, obviously that's a very broad question. Everyone's going to have a different experience, but maybe share some, you know, stories or experiences that you've witnessed from some of the patients and people that you've worked with.
Yes, and I'm not giving medical advice at all here.
Right.
Because I have seen some pretty significant levels of suffering when people have tapered off of psychotropic medications too quickly. So I'm not advising that whatsoever. However, I don't know, the question about integration, I mean, I'm assuming that he means there has been expanded states of consciousness access and then working on integration. So I would have to know a little bit more about what medicine we're talking about, and in particular, what benzo we're talking about, because part of what my practice involves is supporting people who want to eliminate or lessen their use of pharmaceuticals.
Right.
And so I've seen a lot of different experiences with this, and yes, there is a possibility to begin reducing the doses of psychotropic drugs. Benzos, the anti-anxiety medications, are notorious for withdrawals. So does it mean that somebody could do ayahuasca once and then stop taking their meds? No.
Right.
To me, what happens is, okay, first there's the slowness of a slow taper. So properly working with, and this is who I collaborate with in my practice, functional medicine doctors, nurse practitioners with prescriptive abilities that can prescribe liquid forms of the pharmaceutical in order to do a slow, precise taper. The taper is very important. You can't just cold turkey a psych drug, especially if you've been on it years. That is where the suffering can be ongoing. So making sure that the medical piece is under wraps for the taper, then supporting the body in nutrient deficiencies that have been caused by ongoing use of pharmaceuticals. And then where I come in is have we addressed the trauma from your nervous system? Because as you start to lower dosing on a psychotropic, all the energy, because these drugs can disconnect us and kind of numb us. That's why they make the negative symptoms go away, like depression and anxiety. It's because we get a little bit numb. And so as you start to reduce the dose and that numbing sense goes away, guess what happens? You get more access to all of the trauma that
Right.
have been sequestered down. And if you're going too quickly in that taper, it can feel like you just wanted a little sip of water from a water hose and somebody turned it on full blast, right? And your trauma is coming out at you in ways that are too intense for you to metabolize. So so my job is to make sure that we have, because I work in somatic psychotherapy, using the body to discharge and release trauma from the nervous system. So suffice it to say, yes, I've seen many people liberate themselves from psychiatric drugs with the help of psychedelics, but it's not easy and it requires a work and a team.
Right.
If you've been on these drugs more than a year. So there's also an interesting protocol that I just came across. There's a bunch of different psychopharmacologists in the psychedelic community who are working on just this thing. So just came across a protocol using micro dosing with psilocybin for micro tapering off of SSRIs. So there's brilliant people that are putting together education and resources, and I can't tell you how exciting that is from where I sit, because as a clinician, there are extreme limitations in this particular
Right.
realm of the work, and so to see people putting out protocols is fabulous.
It is, yeah. I mean, it just continues. I mean, the infrastructure just continues to grow here, with psychedelics and with this space, and that's very, very exciting. I know it's going to create a lot more new opportunities for you, and of course, I think create opportunities to just better treat the people and the patients that you work with. So on that side, it's very exciting. I know you and I have talked a little bit about sort of what's been going on here in society for the last 12 months. Obviously, we've all dealt with a lot, and I mean, we were kind of talking candidly before we started recording, where it just seems like each month it seems to one up the prior month in terms of stress and anxiety and these events that are just happening, and from the COVID-19 pandemic, and just everything else that has happened, the elections, it's been a lot. And so you've had stress levels, depression, anxiety, PTSD really just at all-time highs, unfortunately, for hundreds of thousands of people. And that's also contributed to an increase in suicide rates, unfortunately, which has become very, very alarming, very serious here in the United States. With that in mind, and with this passion that you have for plants and plant medicine, how important is it that we continue to move things forward here? And what role do you hope to see plants play in sort of healing society, in recognizing the very serious wound that exists right now with so many people?
Mhm. In a lot of ways, I think the plants are our only hope.
Mm.
Meaning that we are experiencing a mental health crisis in America. I can confidently say that. My practice has never been this busy. I get calls every day. Um, all of my colleagues, their practices are full. There are wait lists for therapists. What's happening in our ERs is that we're seeing a dramatic influx of people coming to the ER with suicidal, homicidal behaviors in ways that we have never seen before. It is taxing our medical system. So as the virus begins to subside, I predict that we're going to see this uptick in people coming to the hospital for mental health concerns. I mean, that it's already happening, but the way trauma works is that when you're in the middle of a trauma, we're not going to see the full long lasting impacts of trauma and PTSD until the trauma is over,
Mm.
because some people's nervous systems are just going to be in this state of hyperarousal, kind of, with the chaos. And until
Right.
the chaos subsides, we really won't know the long-term ramifications of the mental health consequences. Obviously, I have concerns about our youth, our children and our teenagers, and the long-lasting impacts this level of chaos in our culture is creating in the future generations. It's like a big uncontrolled experiment on these children's nervous systems. So suffice it to say, not only do we need plant medicines to heal from these experiences, we need new tools. Because again, I've said this before and I'll say it again, there are no good pharmaceuticals for trauma and PTSD. There aren't any.
Right.
They don't exist, but the plants, that's what the plants do. And so not only are we going to need this for healing our mental health and our psychological well-being, I think we're also going to need regenerative farming practices, organic farming practices for our food supply. We are being asked as a species to course correct. We're being asked to make changes in our way of living. And one of those is reconnecting with the earth and remembering how to tend to the earth. And obviously that means growing plants. So I'm hopeful, I'm inspired. Despite all of the suffering and the chaos, this is how innovation is born.
It is.
So I just keep holding on to this vision of prohibition ending and people being able to access medicines in a affordable, economical, safe way. And I can envision that. I can see that as a reality. And I think the more of us that can continue to envision that, the closer we get to manifesting that reality.
Yeah, I really agree. And I mean, the work that you're doing, really is helping contribute to that and, moving things forward with this. And I mean, you can tell, I mean, I talk to so many different people, every single day, people's, perception of plant medicine and, treatments that have been considered alternative for so many years, people are starting to embrace them. They're starting to recognize psychedelics are more than just, a hippie thing, going to trip on mushrooms or anything like that. There's so much more behind it. You've got Johns Hopkins, New York University, reputable institutions like that are out there studying these substances and really getting some really good, findings and research behind it. So it's an exciting time. And I can't think of a better time because like you said, I think we're about to really see, I think the real ramifications of everything that society's been through over the last 12 months. I think it's really going to start to impact us here in the coming months, unfortunately. So, but, Kelli, again, thank you so much. This was great. We could sit here all day and talk about this. I mean, there's just so much to cover.
I really appreciate this opportunity and the work you're doing with Psychedelic Spotlight. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, we will keep fighting the good fight and hoping everybody hangs in there. I know you and Austin, right now going through a pretty rough week. So glad to see that you're safe. But again, thank you so much. We'll get the Organic Mental Health Center website information included with this. But Kelli, you have a wonderful day. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You too.